The last glint of gold I saw wasn't on my finger, but reflecting in the polished surface of the antique armoire as he walked out. He didn't slam the door, of course. David was far too refined for such an undignified exit. It was a soft, almost regretful click, like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. My breath hitched, a silent, internal gasp that rattled through my ribs. He was gone. My hand instinctively went to my neck, where the sapphire pendant, a gift from my grandmother, usually rested. Then to my wrist, the delicate gold chain he'd given me on our 5th anniversary. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through the hollow ache he'd left behind. It wasn't just the void of his presence. It was the sickening realization that something else was missing. I moved through the house in a daze, a phantom limb searching for what was lost. The jewelry box on my dresser, usually overflowing with the accumulated memories of a lifetime, was unervingly light. My mother's pearls, the intricate silver earrings from our trip to Morocco, even the cheap, cheerful costume pieces I'd collected over the years. All gone. He hadn't just walked out on me. He'd plundered my past. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, a dry, humorless sound. He, the man who had preached about the sanctity of our shared future, had systematically stripped me of my most personal treasures. The man who had looked me in the eye, promising forever, had been meticulously planning this heist. The glint of gold, no longer a symbol of love, but a chilling premonition of his true colors. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the silk comforter feeling alien and cold beneath my fingers. My mind raced, not with grief, but with a sudden, icy clarity. This wasn't just a breakup. This was an act of war. And David, with his quiet charm and calculated cruelty, had just fired the first shot. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a simmering anger that felt surprisingly clean, almost purifying. Tears. Not a single one. David wasn't worth them. He was a thief, a parasite who had fed off my trust, my affection, and now my possessions. But he had gravely underestimated me. He knew the woman he had lived with, the one who loved art and quiet evenings, but he clearly hadn't seen the other side. The CEO, the strategist, the woman who built empires from the ground up. My laptop, usually a portal to spreadsheets and endless meetings, suddenly became a weapon. I bypassed the usual login, punching in the emergency admin codes I had built into the system years ago. A break glass in case of global meltdown protocol I designed for the company. Little did I know the meltdown would be personal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a furious ballet of keystrokes. First, the corporate bank accounts. David, in his infinite arrogance, had always assumed he was untouchable within our shared ventures, leveraging his creative director title for a lifestyle he hadn't truly earned. He'd never bothered to understand the intricate financial architecture of the company I had founded, the company that bore my vision. He thought he had a golden parachute. I was about to show him it was a lead anchor. I initiated the full asset freeze. Not just the main operational accounts, but the offshore reserves, the investment portfolios, the discretionary funds he considered his private slush fund. Every single digital pipeline that flowed into his pockets, I severed it. I watched the confirmation messages flash across the screen, each one a small victory, a silent cheer in the battlefield of my living room. Then the credit lines. His corporate cards, his personal credit cards linked to the company accounts. All flagged, all cancelled, all blacklisted. He wouldn't be buying a celebratory champagne bottle with my money, or anyone else's for that matter. The system whirred, processing my commands, each click of the mouse echoing with a chilling finality. I was dismantling his financial world brick by digital brick. I paused, leaning back in my chair, watching the screen glow with the cold, hard facts of his financial obliteration. My breath was steady now, my heart beating with a rhythm of calm, calculated vengeance. He wanted to leave me with zero. I would make sure he understood the true meaning of the word. The digital obliteration complete, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't the cathartic release I might have expected, but a cold, quiet satisfaction. I walked to the kitchen, the silence of the house amplified by his absence, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't tremble. My focus was absolute. He would inevitably try to access his funds. He was meticulous about his spending, even if the money wasn't technically his. The first sign I knew would be a call to his bank. Then a furious call to my bank, demanding an explanation. He'd probably try to reach our CFO, then our legal team. He'd discover the locked doors one by one, each refusal a small, invisible brick building the wall around him. But I wasn't done. Freezing his accounts was merely a defensive maneuver. I needed to ensure he truly understood the depth of his miscalculation. I returned to the laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was the part that would truly sting. I went into the company's internal communication system, the one we'd built for transparency and efficiency. David, ever the showman, had used it primarily for grand pronouncements and self-congratulatory messages. He wouldn't expect what I was about to do. I drafted an email. Not to the entire company, not yet. But to the board of directors, the key investors, and a select group of department heads who had always quietly resented David's inflated ego and questionable work ethic. The subject line was succinct: urgent financial discrepancies and leadership transition. The body of the email was even more direct. No emotion, no blame, just cold, hard facts. It detailed the immediate freeze of all accounts linked to David's access, citing unauthorized and significant withdrawals of company assets for personal use. I included screenshots of the transactions, small, damning snapshots of his greed. I mentioned the stolen jewelry, framing it as a symptom of a larger, systemic betrayal. I concluded by stating that I had taken immediate and decisive action to safeguard the company's financial integrity, and that I would be assuming full, undisputed control. It wasn't just about money. It was about reputation, about trust, about the very foundation of the company we had supposedly built together. I hesitated for only a second before hitting send. The click of the mouse was barely audible, but in the silence of the house, it felt like a thunderclap. The email was out there, a ghost in the machine, ready to haunt him. David hadn't just walked out on me. He had walked into a meticulously laid trap. The minutes that followed the email's dispatch stretched into an agonizing eternity, each tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall amplifying the tension. I knew the email would land like a bomb, shattering the carefully constructed illusion of David's competence and integrity. My phone, usually a constant companion, lay silent on the counter, a testament to the calm before the storm. I imagined the scene, a board member perhaps over their morning coffee, opening my email. The initial confusion, then the dawning realization, followed by a swift call to another board member. The ripple effect. Panic would set in. Reputations would be on the line. David, the golden boy, would be exposed as nothing more than a common thief. My gaze drifted to the empty spot on my ring finger. The engagement ring, a supposedly irreplaceable symbol of his commitment, was also gone. He hadn't just stolen jewelry. He'd stolen a future I had so naively believed in. But the sting of that loss was now eclipsed by a cold, hard resolve. He had underestimated the woman he had tried to break. He had forgotten that the CEO wasn't just a title. It was a mindset. Hours crawled by. No calls. No frantic texts from David. The silence was unnerving, almost a taunt. Had he not tried to access the accounts yet? Was he still basking in the glow of his supposed victory, oblivious to the digital noose tightening around his neck? Or was he already in a panic, trying to untangle the financial knots I had so expertly tied? The only sound was the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant city murmur. It was a silence filled with anticipation, the quiet before the storm truly broke. I knew it was coming. His arrogance wouldn't allow him to simply disappear. He would react. And when he did, I would be ready. Every move he made, every desperate attempt to reclaim what he thought was his, would only serve to further ensnare him. I walked to the large window overlooking the city, the lights beginning to twinkle in the encroaching dusk. The world outside looked so normal, so unaware of the financial earthquake I had just unleashed. But I knew that somewhere out there, David was about to realize that the zero he left me with was precisely the number he would now be facing himself. The silence shattered precisely at 3:17 p.m. Not with a call, but with a torrent of texts, each one a raw, unfiltered scream of rage. My phone, which I had deliberately muted, vibrated furiously across the polished wood of my desk. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen, watching the notifications pile up. What have you done? Access denied. Are you insane? I'm calling my lawyers. You'll regret this. Where is my money, Anna? I know it was you. He was using my name, Anna. He almost never called me Anna. It was always love, or darling, or some other saccharine endearment designed to mask his true nature. The raw fury in his texts was a more honest reflection of him than anything he had ever shown me. It was the sound of a cornered animal, panicked and lashing out. Smiled. A slow, cold smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment David realized his carefully constructed world was crumbling. Finally the phone rang. His number. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. He tried again, and again. The persistence was almost admirable, if it weren't so pathetic. He left a voicemail, his voice hoarse, ragged with disbelief and anger. Anna, pick up the damn phone. What is this? I can't access anything. This is my money. You can't just do this. There was a hint of desperation, a tremor beneath the rage that was music to my ears. He was spiraling. I didn't answer. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I opened my personal email and drafted a single, concise reply to his last, most unhinged text. You sold my jewelry before walking out. I froze the corporate accounts and left you with exactly zero. I hit send. A simple statement of fact, no emotion, no explanation, just the cold, hard truth. It was the period at the end of his very long, very painful sentence. I imagined him reading it, the color draining from his face, the full weight of his predicament crashing down on him. The silence on my end would be louder than any shout. His response to my final text was immediate, almost desperate. More calls, more texts, but the tone had shifted. The fury was still there, but now it was laced with a desperate plea, a frantic need to understand. He was trying to negotiate, to reason, to intimidate. It was also transparent. I had given my phone to my assistant, instructing her to filter out all calls and messages from his number. My focus had to remain on the company, on shoring up the foundations he had tried to undermine. The board had begun their inquiries as expected. My email, with its irrefutable evidence, had done its job. I spent the next few hours in a series of urgent video conferences, presenting the data, outlining the safeguards I had already put in place. There was no room for emotion, no time for personal grievance. This was business. And in business I was relentless. I showed them how David had siphoned off funds, not just for his personal use, but for questionable ventures that had never been approved. I laid bare his financial indiscretions, leaving no doubt about his culpability. The board's reaction was swift and decisive. An emergency meeting was called, David was immediately suspended, and a full forensic audit was initiated. The official statement from the company, which I helped draft, was clinical. Irregularities in financial conduct have led to the immediate suspension of Mr. David, no last name mentioned, but implied pending a full investigation. His name, once a celebrated part of our brand, was now being actively purged from all corporate communications. I watched the news reports trickle in, the carefully worded headlines hinting at scandal. David, who craved the spotlight, was now being exposed in the most humiliating way possible. His carefully curated image, the charming creative director, was crumbling into dust. As the day drew to a close, I finally allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The house was still empty, the physical void he left behind still present. But the hollow ache was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. He had wanted to leave me with nothing, but I had shown him that 0 was a number he would now intimately understand. The jewelry, the lost memories. They were mere casualties in a war he had started. And I had won. The forensic audit unearthed even more of his financial misdeeds, confirming my initial accusations and then some. The board, initially shocked, became a unified front, their trust in me solidified by my decisive actions and the irrefutable evidence. They saw not a betrayed partner, but a strong leader who had protected their investments and the company's future. The legal process would be long and messy, but I knew with absolute certainty that he had no ground to stand on. His 0 was absolute. My personal life, however, began to unfold in a different way. The initial numbness had given way to a quiet sense of liberation. The empty spaces in my home, once stark reminders of what I'd lost, now felt like canvases for something new. The jewelry, the physical tokens of a past I now saw as a lie, didn't matter anymore. Their absence was a cleansing. I found myself working longer hours, not out of stress, but out of a renewed passion. The company, once a shared dream, was now singularly mine, its direction entirely in my hands. The creativity and innovation I poured into it were unburdened by David's constant critiques and manipulative inputs. It was exhilarating. One evening, weeks later, as the city lights twinkled outside my office window, I received a final, desperate message. Not a text, not a call, but an email, a single line from an unfamiliar address. "You left me with nothing." I read it, and a profound sense of peace washed over me. There was no anger, no triumph, just a quiet understanding. He finally got it. He had walked out thinking he had taken everything, leaving me with what he believed was 0. But in that act, he had unknowingly given me everything: freedom, clarity, and the unshakable knowledge of my own strength. He had thought he was taking my world, but all he had done was clear the path for me to build a new, stronger one. And that, I realized, was priceless.